The world unfolds differently for each of us. Why? Where do the rules come from? Within each of us, there is a unique philosophy shaping our thoughts, beliefs, feelings, worldviews, and actions. This is Inner Dialogues with Ecem, an introspective space for curious souls and minds. This is where you get to understand your individual philosophy that writes the script of your life. This is where we unveil the inner wisdom that guides you. Yep, that was your inner sage knocking the door. Let's go and chat with him. Hi, it's Ecem. Welcome back to Inner Dialogues with me. I haven't been coming out with new episodes for the last 2 weeks. I'm aware. But it has been so hard to execute on my ideas, to be honest, and turn the conversations I've been holding with people and my clients into a podcast episode or any form of social media content. And today, as I was watching a course video from Jay Shetty, he was talking about creativity and creative blocks, which stirred my water, to be honest, and let me start writing the script for this episode you're listening to right now. This creates a rut, almost depressive mood, loss of excitement, and lack in execution of my ideas is periodic for me. And when I was able to pinpoint and realize that exactly a year ago, that it was a periodic thing for me, thanks to my coach at that time, it changed the way I planned my days and took some weight off my shoulders. As always, take what you need and leave the rest of what I say. But when it comes to when is it that time of the month when I'm about to get my period, I tend to get in a creative dry spell. I lose my passion toward things. I tend to turn more inward and dim my exposure of things, situations, and people. I tend to consume more than I create. This is a pattern I realize when it comes to my hormonal cycle, and thanks to that cultivated awareness, I was able to recognize in others too. Let me take you a recent session I had with one of my clients. For like an hour, we talked about what has happened recently in her life, reflected on the journey, talked about her dreams, the things she is excited about, but somehow whatever we talked was taking a more pessimistic spin. Although she is a person who sees the positive in everything, this time all she focused on was how lost she was feeling, and at the same time she was being a bit cruel to herself. At that time, it clicked me and I asked her, where are you in your cycle? And in that brief moment when she heard that question, I saw her eyes shining. She was able to trace back why she was feeling in the way she was feeling. She started her period the day before our session. Being able to pointing that out made her able to hold the space for herself to fully experience what and how she was feeling. So I asked her, how can you hold space for yourself? After she found her answers, this time I asked her, how can you not let yourself to be dragged down by your period hormones without neglecting them? She's such a spiritual woman. She is an Ayurveda and yoga teacher, so she is very much in touch with ancient wisdom. She said, if I were to live in ancient times, I'd be in the red tent taking a nap with all the other women. I love that when she said that. So I said to her, give that support and kindness to yourself then. So we concluded the session with her finding herself the spaces through which she was going to give that support and kindness to herself. One of her takeaways from the session was that this mental state and mood she was in due to her period can be a gift and opportunity for her to focus and take action on the ideas she has based on what she needs right now, instead of focusing on what others want to see or want from her. Womanhood has its own cycle, and as we learn more about it, give ourselves time to understand and experience it, and invest into create space for embracing each stage of our cycle, we start to harvest the power that lies within us. Following that session, I had a similar conversation with a previous client of mine. She said that she has almost no idea about her cycle and how it works when it comes to her body, emotional, and mental state. I shared my own journey with her, and she took some mental notes for herself to track her cycle and observe herself in order to embrace and better work with herself. And our little online coffee date with her ended with the reasons why most of females are disconnected from their cycles and do not have enough knowledge and observance about our hormonal cycles. We talked about the societal shame on female body, how parental education and school education differs between a male and female body, how the focus of male and female body is mostly on sex education more than firstly understanding the functions of our body, and how all of these things become a hindrance and opportunity in our own paths to understand our own female bodies and learn to work and live with them holistically. Because at the end of the day, the prime focus of understanding hormonal cycles should not be only on predicting pregnancy. It's far more complex system than solely that. I'm definitely not a professional here, but I'll share my own personal experience when it comes to this creative rut I'm in, my incubation tendencies, and how they all relate to my cycle. As you know or might know, as females, we have 4 phases of our hormonal cycle: menstruation, the follicular phase, ovulation, and the luteal phase. Very briefly, menstruation is when we bleed, right? It is when we have our periods. And how funny it is when we think of our cycles, most of us only think about this phase. Bleeding is just one phase of our hormonal cycle. This piece of knowledge is very new to me, to be honest. A year ago, I didn't know this. I didn't understand it. That's a better way to put it. Anyway, the other phases, the follicular phase, ovulation, and the luteal phase. The follicular phase is where our follicles start to grow on the surface of our ovaries, right? And the ovulation stage is usually known as the fertility period, because this is when a mature egg is being released from an ovary. This is when there's a high possibility of getting pregnant. And the last phase before our period starts is called the luteal phase. This is our focus today. Now, in this phase, my incubation tendencies have their peaks, like really. As I said before, it is challenging for me to create things in this stage. I tend to consume more, as in consumption of food, but more so consumption of other people's creations. Books, courses, educational content, videos, movies. I tend to come up with ideas, but not having passion or energy to execute on them. I'm basically nesting, right? My body is actually nesting for a possible pregnancy. I read this book on female hormones a couple of years ago, and thanks to that book, I was able to guide my mom to a doctor who has a more holistic approach in hormone treatment for females in premenopause. And what I learned in that book was the functions of these 2 main hormones that we all know, or at least heard at some point in our lives: estrogen and progesterone, right? The doctor who wrote the book said the progesterone creates the necessary environment for a potential baby. It thickens the uterus lining, just like preparing a comfy and safe bed for a potential ovum, a fertilized egg. And if there's no baby to be nested there, then we start to shed those thickened uterus linings by bleeding them out. So as I'm biologically nesting, I'm simultaneously nesting in my creations. I'm feeding myself with people's creations, books, quotes, courses, all of which creates a bunch of ideas in me. so that when the time feels right, when there's enough nesting, I can go and start delivering and executing my ideas. I heard about the nesting instinct, which happens in the last phases of pregnancy. It has been observed that a burst of energy tends to take over pregnant women in the last few weeks of their pregnancy that inspires them to organize the house, baby clothes, baby's room in preparation for baby's arrival. I experienced that burst of energy in the form of being drawn to consumption of any type of content and books. If a book that I read inspires me X amount in other phases of my cycles, during my luteal phase, it inspires 10 more times. I tend to get inspired a lot from music in these times. It feels like the melodies hit different or the lyrics. It's a mental and emotional creative nesting which thickens my inner creative arena with ideas. Now, as I've mentioned a bunch of times, the incubation tendencies I have, this phase is such a fertile ground for them. The mum birds sitting on their eggs to bring them into hatching, right? This is basically that. I sit on my ideas to further nurture them, feed them with inspiration, exposure to opposites, and with any form of necessary nutrients. This is the zone I have to be careful about, though. Because as I indulge myself in more incubation, I tend to overconsume sometimes during my luteal phase, during my nesting phase. And overconsumption overcrowds my mind, which ends up making me stuck in the action taking phase later on. Overconsumption tends to overcrowd my mind because I may have an inclination toward feeding myself with things give me comfort more than stimulation and fruitful nesting materials, which could trigger nurturing actions later on. Let me give you a very simple example that actually caused me to start writing this podcast episode. I know that I'm enrolled in this course. I have these videos that I saved in my Watch Later folder. I have books that I bought. All of them are the things that focuses on my passions, my interests. Either it is philosophy or mindfulness or into business or planning, whatever they are. During this phase of my cycle, the luteal phase, I have to, how can I put this? I have to slightly push myself to start reading that book, watching a piece of video that introduces me a new perspective, singing a song that excites me, starting to watch the course content from this inspirational and intuitive business owner, or joining that live call, which I know will stir my water and lead me to create new connections with people, but also in my mind, connecting the dots as well. I have to slightly push myself to start doing these things that I know will be good for me and get me out of this almost depressive mood and this rut that I tend to feel in. I know that they will get my creative juices flowing. As I said, the spark of writing these lines that you're listening to right now came to me as I was watching the content of Jay Shetty's social media course, which I had to push myself a little to start watching it again. In one of his videos in that course, he quoted Steve Jobs. He said that creativity is just connecting things, said Steve Jobs. You just need enough things to connect in your head. If you're not listening to podcasts, reading books, watching movies, and allowing yourself to consume content, you're not connecting enough dots. And when you're not connecting enough dots, that's when you feel you have a dry spell, he says. Now look at that. That's exactly how I was. A part of me is resisting to consume things that I know will trigger creation in me. It's almost like, following the nesting analogy, I'm resisting to nest and get prepared for a baby that is about to come, right? It's like I'm in this bubble in my luteal phase and I want to stay away from anything that will pop my bubble. But at the same time, The air is getting thicker and it's getting harder to breathe in that bubble. The oxygen is decreasing. I'm starting to get intoxicated by the same oxygen that is stuck in this bubble. How I describe this bubble feeling in my mental state is as narrative. I'm a person who lives inside of their minds. That's how I described myself a year ago, more than a year ago, to my coach. It was last summer. So that bubble where I pile my incubations in is my comfort zone. It is a narrative that I create for myself, and I get stuck in that same narrative. I feel literally intoxicated with that narrative. I broke someone's heart a couple of months ago. I was again in my luteal phase. I had a misfortunate accident happen, so it wasn't the best combo. The accident behaved as a catalysis for some decisions that were left overdue. For a while, I was feeling intoxicated by this narrative in my mind. The narrative was being supported the same group of people I was keep seeing, the same situations I was involved in. And there was nothing wrong in any of the situations or people. It was just my perception, and the narrative it created in me started to suffocate me. I needed a change in the narrative, a fresh eye, so to say. So I ended my coaching relationship with my previous coach, not in a very constructive manner, I'd say. The reason why I ended it was due to this narrative change I wanted to do in my life, but being in a state of post-accident plus in my incubation phase, aka for me luteal phase, it wasn't the best time to take that decision. In the nesting phase, we need food, nesting materials in order to nurture the nest. When the time to deliver that baby, so to say, comes, and when the nesting ends, it is that time to take a decision, to execute on your preparations. I didn't do that, and that led me to see the world as black and white, ignoring the gray zone. In one of the course videos of Jay that I mentioned previously, he used the term echo chamber. I want to quote his words, not because it was the case for me, but more so they made me realize the back end of my narrative intoxication, or being stuck in the same narrative. Jay says, quote, "A study by MIT showed that people with more diverse networks, people who know people who don't know the people who don't know each other, are more creative and innovative than people who know each other. Most of us spend our lives in echo chamber. We speak to the same people, we watch the same shows, we are exposed to the same big events. What that creates is an echo chamber. It creates a bubble inside which you live, but creativity and innovation is outside of that bubble." End quote. Sometimes it is challenging for me, as I said, to expose myself to content and books that I know will bring me new perspectives. So instead of pushing myself for that, I recently realized that I tend to watch or read the things I watched or read previously. I'm looking for comfort in that echo chamber, and I don't want to pop that chamber, that bubble. The very reason why we have this episode was because I decided to go and watch that course content in which I looked for stimulation, which was going to make me go out of my echo chamber and that familiar narrative. And when I was slightly out of my echo chamber, creativity, new ideas, and expression found me. Or maybe I found them. But in any case, creativity and ideas started to flow in me. Same thing is happening since Saturday or Sunday when I started to read this book about philosophy and how philosophy is a way of living. Every night since Sunday, I'm reading a couple of pages from it, and every time I ended up creating something new. The first 2 nights, it was journaling about my use of philosophy in my coaching and the messages I give with my brand. The third night, it was scripting a video. The fourth night, it was writing an email to reach out to someone. And last night, it was coming up with a script for a video, but also creating a new offer for corporates. A new thing that I didn't know it was in me. Probably I read, 30 minutes? But created ideas, wrote them, and further conceptualized them for 2 hours. All of this for me shows the power of stimulation, stirring my water. But doing so in a way that following my interests, passions, and inspiration. This is the importance of my nesting phase. We all have nesting phases, whether it is in our luteal phase or whether we are a male. Nesting is needed to give birth. Creativity is connecting the dots, as Steve Jobs said. The dots are in us. Sometimes we need more of them, and nesting can create more dots, but also it can create necessary conditions for connections to appear between the dots, to creativity to appear. But nesting is not collecting garbage. Have you ever seen doves or any kind of bird building nest? They collect fallen leaves, twigs, and tree branches, right? They look like garbage to us, but no, it's definitely not, at least for them. What builds your nesting material will be different from someone else. But as I said, when I was explaining how I tend to overcrowd my mind in the times of incubation and nesting, I'd encourage you to be mindful about with what you build your nest with. Where do you invest your energy in? To whom, to what content, what books, which conversations? What are the signs of nesting? What are the signs of overcrowdedness for you? I read this quote right before I pressed record, so I want to share it with you too. Jiddu Krishnamurti says, quote, "Space and silence are necessary because it is only when the mind is alone that it can come upon something totally new." End quote. For me, exposure to others' creations comes easy in the times of nesting, and staying with myself is a bit challenging. But I know and I experience every time when I stay with myself without any stimulation, it brings out what I have inside. So let's be aware of our nesting materials, but also our simmering times during the nesting, right? What are your fruitful nesting materials? What are your garbages for your nest? There's so much material to nest with. So how do you differentiate between all of them? How do you dim the noise and declutter your mind? How do you slow down in all that nesting? And finally, how do you turn that nurturing nest into a thriving and full of life end product? How do you ensure you start executing on your ideas when nesting phase comes to an end? How can you make sure that you can leave behind that nest when it is no longer needed? I'll leave you with these questions, but before I do, I just want to say that all of these things I shared with you is about my experience of my own hormonal cycle. Yours will be different, definitely and even inevitably. Let what you heard here, be an invitation for you to listen to your body, track your mental and emotional state, and observe yourself. And for anyone without a female hormonal cycle, this can be an invitation for you to understand female body and cultivate spaces for them. We rise all together anyway. This is it for today. As our conversation for today fades away, may you find your own echoes of it that resonate within you. Thanks for listening today. This is Inner Dialogues with Ecem, a place where you discover your inner you, a place where you belong. Take care.